And as we've been hearing there, people arriving into the country from Brazil and South Africa specifically will face a mandatory 14-day quarantine period in a hotel, even if they have a negative PCR test. And of course, that is because of concern about the new COVID variants that are associated with those countries. So what impact will those new measures have, and who will they impact on? Eoghan Corry is editor of Air and Travel magazine, and he joins us now on the line. Eoghan, just in terms of the amount of people who may be affected by that, how many people do we know roughly would travel between Ireland and those two countries in a typical year? And I know we're not in a typical year, but in a typical year.
Good afternoon. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're not in a typical year. I mean, the grand total would be about 40,000 for South Africa, about 23,000 outbound, 17,000 inbound, obviously return flights. Brazil, about 12,000. So the numbers are tiny. They're a tiny proportion of the, for instance, 32 million that would have gone through Dublin Airport in 2019. And they are a trickle of a trickle of a trickle. So I would be really surprised. All the measures have been announced today, and there's been quite a clamour for these measures. I would really be surprised if we see a single case of someone being isolated in a hotel out of this.
Well, it'd be really interesting to see, because we did hear last week that more than 3,000 people from South Africa and Brazil arrived over a 5-week period recently. I don't know, is there a typical profile of who these travellers are? They're hardly coming for tourism at the moment.
The figure sounds very high. The figure of 3,000 is higher than it was in 2019 before the COVID. So I'm not doubting. I haven't actually seen who the source for that figure, because it's, and second, first of all, we've no direct flights from Brazil and South Africa, so the tracking of it isn't off the. It's very easy to track arrivals when they've come from an airport. So when we're evaluating the impact of this, I think that the numbers are very small. There's a really important point as well here, is that a lot of the flights to and from Brazil and South Africa have already been curtailed, because we're not the only ones that are worried about it. For instance, Turkish Airlines would have curtailed their South Africa programme, and the Brazil flights, actually the Brazilian side stopped the flights in the UK because they were afraid of the UK variant arriving. The number of people affected will be very, 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 very small. And even if we were at full 2019 numbers, the number of people would be very, very small. It's not going to have the sort of create the sort of logistical problems that Mary was outlining there, because the numbers will be so small.
From those two countries specifically, yeah. And you mentioned direct flights then. Are there direct flights from those countries into Ireland? And if not, what routes do they take?
Usually there's 4 ways in from South Africa: London and Paris and Frankfurt and the Middle East, mainly Dubai. Doha has a service from South Africa and a service to Dublin at the moment. So there'd be the sort of ways in that people would look at. The way from Brazil traditionally has been through Lisbon. TAP have a daily flight into Dublin, but a lot of the Brazilian flights have been curtailed to such a minimum. A really important point is that before you get on a flight, for any leaving but either South Africa or Brazil, you have to have your negative test. And this isn't the case of people. The aviation industry are very, very interested in keeping people off aircraft that might infect other passengers or might infect the staff of the aircraft. So nobody is going to be getting on a flight unless they have the documentary evidence of their test. And that's not an Irish thing. It's not something that came out of the cabinet today. That's what has been happening quite rapidly over the last 2 weeks, Sarah.
Okay. I suppose what I'm wondering then, just finally, Eoghan, even if they do have a test, and even if it is a negative test, under these new plans, people from Brazil and South Africa will still have to quarantine for 14 days in a hotel, even if they have a negative test. But what I'm wondering is there a chance that people from Brazil or South Africa could come here not directly from Brazil or South Africa and could slip through the net as such? Or do visa issues make sure that can't happen?
always a chance that people will take an alternative route. But where we are picking up imported, where the HSPC have been very interested in, is picking up imported infections. The numbers, as Leo Varadkar said last night in Clare Byrne, are really, really small. They're available online. There are the grand total of 9 imported cases in the country at the moment. And that's the level of direct imported infection. Now, the separate debate, and the reason the Cabinet made the decision today, is new variants. But the numbers are small enough to be tracked and to be tackled. And if somebody does a workaround, remember, it's not just from Brazil and South Africa you now require the negative PCR. Ryanair will not let you on a flight unless you have a documented PCR, and they're turning away some passengers who, for instance, would have the NHS PCR in Britain, or PCRs that aren't up to the standard. So you're not getting on a flight without a negative PCR to start with. Right. So while there is a risk there, I think we're almost at the stage, 9 out of 43,000 cases imported at the moment, when travel can be discounted, and the
all right, I'm not sure about travel being discounted.
Can be removed.
Sure, all right. Well, I'm not sure that's where the debate is at the moment, but thank you very much for joining us this evening. That's Eoghan Corry, editor of Éireann Travel magazine.